What happens when someone files a lawsuit, only to discover that the lawsuit could expose far more information than they expected? That's the question at the center of a closely watched legal battle involving former President Donald Trump and the BBC. A federal judge has allowed significant discovery to move forward, including requests for financial records connected to hundreds of business entities and subpoenas involving several people in Trump's orbit. So, is this a major legal setback, or simply another step in a long court process? The answer is more complicated than many headlines suggest, and that's exactly what we're breaking down today. Welcome back. In this video, we're taking a closer look at one of the most significant developments in Trump's ongoing civil litigation. We'll explain why Trump sued the BBC in the first place, why financial records suddenly became part of the case, what the judge actually ruled, why lawyers on both sides believe this decision matters, and what could happen next as the lawsuit moves forward. As always, this video is based on publicly reported court proceedings. The litigation is ongoing, and no final decision has been reached on the merits of the lawsuit. Let's begin with how this case started, how this lawsuit began. To understand today's court ruling, we first have to go back to the lawsuit itself. In late 2025, Donald Trump filed a defamation lawsuit against the BBC. According to the complaint, Trump argued that a BBC documentary edited portions of his January 6, 2021 speech in a way that he says created a false impression about his words and actions. Trump's legal team alleged that the broadcast damaged his reputation and caused significant harm. The lawsuit reportedly sought billions of dollars in damages, arguing that the alleged defamation affected both Trump's reputation and his business interests. The BBC, however, has disputed those claims. The broadcaster has argued that the lawsuit should be dismissed for several legal reasons while continuing to defend its reporting in court. At this stage, it's important to remember something about civil litigation. Filing a lawsuit doesn't automatically mean either side is right. It begins a legal process where both parties gather evidence, challenge each other's claims, and present their arguments before the court. And that's where this story becomes especially interesting. The discovery process changes everything. Many people hear the word discovery without realizing just how important it can be. Discovery is one of the most powerful stages of any civil lawsuit. It's the period where each side can request documents, records, emails, financial information, and testimony that may be relevant to the claims being made. Think of it this way. If someone argues in court that they suffered major financial losses because of another person's actions, the other side is generally allowed to ask for evidence supporting those claims. That's because courts typically require parties to back up allegations with documents, not just arguments. According to court proceedings, Trump's complaint included claims involving economic and reputational harm. Because of those allegations, the magistrate judge concluded that certain financial information could be relevant to the discovery process. That ruling set the stage for today's headline, the judge's decision. The court ruled that discovery could proceed regarding financial information connected to entities managed through Trump's revocable trust. The judge also allowed certain subpoenas sought by the BBC to move forward, although the scope of discovery may still be subject to further review as the litigation continues. That doesn't mean the BBC has won the lawsuit. It doesn't mean Trump has lost the case, and it certainly doesn't determine whether defamation occurred. Instead, it means the court believes this information may be relevant enough to be exchanged during the discovery phase before the case moves toward later proceedings. But here's where things become even more significant. Trump's legal team reportedly argued that they intended to narrow the damages being sought. Would that change the court's decision? Or had the original complaint already opened the door to broader discovery? That's the question we'll examine in the next part. Why the financial records matter. At first glance, many viewers might wonder, why would a defamation lawsuit involve financial records at all? The answer lies in the claims made within the lawsuit itself. In civil court, when someone argues that a statement damaged not only their reputation but also their finances or business operations, the opposing side is often allowed to examine evidence related to those alleged losses. The reasoning is straightforward. If financial harm is part of the claim, financial information may become relevant to determining whether those damages can be proven. According to the court proceedings, the magistrate judge concluded that because Trump's complaint alleged both reputational and economic harm, financial records connected to the Trump revocable trust could be discoverable during litigation. That trust reportedly oversees a large number of business entities. This does not mean every document automatically becomes public. Discovery is different from a public release. Many documents exchanged during litigation can remain confidential or be subject to protective orders issued by the court. Still, the ruling represents an important procedural victory for the BBC because it allows its attorneys to seek information they argue is relevant to defending the case. The debate over evidence. Another point that emerged during court proceedings involved the amount of evidence already exchanged. According to arguments presented in court, the BBC stated that it had produced tens of thousands of pages of documents during discovery. The broadcaster's attorneys also argued that Trump had produced significantly fewer documents at that stage of the litigation. It's important to note that disagreements over document production are common in complex civil lawsuits. Both sides frequently argue that the other has not produced enough information or has requested too much. Judges are then asked to decide what is relevant, proportional, and legally required. That's exactly what happened here. The magistrate judge reviewed the competing arguments before deciding that additional discovery should continue. But Trump's legal team wasn't finished making its case. They presented a new argument that they believed should change the outcome, a strategic shift. During the hearing, Trump's attorneys argued that their legal strategy had evolved. Instead of emphasizing economic damages to his businesses, they indicated they intended to focus more narrowly on reputational harm. From a legal standpoint, that distinction matters. If a plaintiff no longer seeks compensation for business losses, one could argue that extensive financial records become less relevant. However, the magistrate judge focused on something else. She looked at the complaint that had actually been filed with the court, not potential future revisions. At that moment, the operative complaint still included allegations involving financial harm to Trump's businesses. Because those allegations remained part of the case, the judge ruled that financial discovery could continue. That illustrates an important principle in civil litigation. Courts generally rule based on the pleadings currently before them, rather than on changes attorneys say they may make later. Could the lawsuit change? Legal analysts will now be watching one key question. Will Trump's legal team formally amend the complaint? If they do, the court may later consider whether the scope of discovery should also change. That decision would depend on several legal factors and ultimately rest with the court. For now, though, the existing complaint remains the controlling document, and that means the current discovery order continues to stand unless it's modified by a higher court or by a later ruling. But financial records weren't the only issue discussed during the hearing. The BBC also sought permission to subpoena several people close to Trump. Why? And what information are they hoping to learn? That's where this story takes another important turn. The subpoenas expand the case. Alongside the dispute over financial records, another major issue emerged. The BBC requested subpoenas for several individuals associated with Trump, including members of his family and former advisors. According to court proceedings, the requested subpoenas involved individuals such as Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and Michael Flynn. Why would they be relevant? The BBC argued that testimony or documents from these individuals could help establish facts related to issues raised by the lawsuit. Specifically, the broadcaster argued that understanding Trump's intent and state of mind concerning events discussed in the documentary could be relevant to its legal defenses. Trump's attorneys opposed those subpoenas, arguing that they were too broad. After hearing arguments from both sides, the magistrate judge allowed the subpoenas to proceed, while also acknowledging that some requests might later need to be narrowed depending on how discovery develops. Why discovery can be so powerful? This hearing serves as a reminder of something lawyers often say. A lawsuit doesn't just create opportunities, it also creates obligations. Once litigation begins, both sides are generally required to participate in discovery. That includes producing relevant documents, responding to requests, and in some cases, sitting for sworn depositions. Discovery is designed to prevent surprises at trial. Instead of each side revealing evidence at the last minute, the legal system requires information to be exchanged beforehand so both parties can prepare their cases. That's why discovery disputes are often among the most consequential parts of major civil lawsuits. They're less dramatic than courtroom verdicts, but they frequently determine how much evidence eventually becomes available. The possibility of an appeal. Even though the magistrate judge issued this discovery ruling, the legal process isn't necessarily over. Under federal procedure, parties may ask the district judge overseeing the case to review certain rulings made during discovery. According to the hearing discussed in court filings, Trump's legal team was expected to challenge aspects of the magistrate judge's decision. If that happens, the district judge would evaluate whether the magistrate judge correctly applied the law. That means today's ruling may not be the final word. It's another chapter in an ongoing legal process rather than the end of the story. As the case moves forward, several important questions remain unanswered. Will the complaint be amended? Will the district judge leave the discovery order in place? Will the requested financial documents ultimately be produced? Will the subpoenas lead to additional testimony or evidence? And perhaps most importantly, how will these procedural battles shape the eventual outcome of the lawsuit itself? Those questions remain open. What is clear is that this litigation has entered a far more significant phase than where it began. And in our final section, we'll examine what all of this could mean, not just for this case, but for high-profile defamation lawsuits involving public figures, and what viewers should watch for as the legal battle continues. As we've seen throughout this case, the biggest headline isn't necessarily about who wins or loses. It's about how the legal process works. When someone files a lawsuit, especially one seeking substantial damages, they also accept certain legal responsibilities. That includes participating in discovery if the court determines the requested information is relevant. In this case, the judge's ruling doesn't answer the ultimate question of whether the BBC committed defamation. Instead, it allows the parties to gather more evidence before those larger questions are decided. That's an important distinction. Discovery is about collecting facts, not determining guilt, liability, or the final outcome. For both sides, the next phase could prove just as important as the lawsuit itself. The BBC will have the opportunity to seek documents and testimony that it believes support its defense. Trump's legal team, meanwhile, still has several options available. They can continue challenging discovery requests, seek review of the magistrate judge's ruling, or potentially amend portions of the complaint. Each of those decisions could influence how the litigation unfolds over the coming months. Why cases like this matter? High-profile lawsuits involving public figures often receive enormous media attention. But beyond the headlines, they also shape how courts balance competing interests. On one side is a person's right to protect their reputation. On the other is the principle of free expression and the legal standards that govern defamation claims. Neither side automatically prevails simply because a lawsuit is filed. That's why courts rely on evidence, testimony, and established legal procedures rather than public opinion. This case also highlights another important lesson. Legal strategy can have unexpected consequences. Arguments made at the beginning of a lawsuit may later affect what information becomes discoverable. And once those claims are placed before a court, judges, not the parties alone, decide what evidence is relevant under the rules of civil procedure. For anyone following this case, today's ruling serves as a reminder that procedural decisions can significantly influence the direction of litigation, even though they do not resolve the underlying dispute. What to watch next? Several key developments could shape the next chapter of this case. Will Trump's legal team formally amend the complaint? Will the district judge be asked to review the magistrate judge's discovery order? How will the court address any disputes over the scope of subpoenas or financial records? And perhaps most importantly, will the evidence gathered during discovery change the legal positions of either side before the case ever reaches trial? These are the questions legal observers will be watching closely. Because in civil litigation, many cases evolve substantially long before a jury, or even a judge deciding the merits, reaches a final conclusion. For now, this remains an active legal dispute. The court has issued important procedural rulings, but the central claims and defenses have yet to be fully resolved. As always, future court filings, motions, and judicial decisions will determine what happens next. This case demonstrates that litigation is often about much more than dramatic courtroom moments. It's a step-by-step process built on rules, evidence, and judicial oversight. Today's discovery ruling is one important chapter, not the final verdict. As the case moves forward, we'll continue following the verified court developments and explain what they mean in clear, straightforward language. If you found this breakdown helpful, let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think will be the most significant development in this case moving forward? And if you enjoy factual, in-depth coverage of major legal and political stories, consider subscribing so you don't miss our next update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.